Hello, everyone. This is Rahul, and thank you for tuning in to the Cogitations podcast. In this episode, I have a conversation with Dr. David Maslach, Associate Professor in Strategic Management and Innovation at Florida State University's College of Business. I discovered Dr. David Maslach through his YouTube channel and accompanying podcast called Reciprocity, spelled R3 instead of RE, which I highly recommend you check out, especially if you're currently in undergraduate or graduate school. Dr. Maslach also has a website based on the idea of a sharing economy for proofreading articles and improving your writing skills. Links are provided in the description box below. In this episode, Dr. Maslach and I talk about going through the trials of graduate school, his view on what makes a good scientist, and the nature of evolution in scientific communication. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Thank you once again for tuning in.
So it's absolutely a pleasure that you reached out to me. I just wanted to say how flattered and honored I actually was that you reached out. It's really fun.
I'm really glad to, Dr. Maslach. Thank you so much for joining me on the Cogitations podcast. As you know, this is a really new podcast, and I thought that it'd be really relevant from my end to, help other students, from the experiences that you have. It's going to be really useful for the other students. So I just want to start by, hoping like you can tell me a little bit about your background, your educational background, what you've done back in your undergrad, and then how your career has progressed over the years.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, it's an absolute pleasure to be here to chit chat with you. And I'm just like an informal person. So I grew up in Northern Ontario in a little tiny town, and I was able to work really hard, and I got into chemical engineering at the University of Waterloo. Which is a decent school. It's sort of recognized. And then I did a master's of applied science in management science. That was in the engineering department. And then I went to a business school at the University of Western Ontario and did strategy. And it was, I studied innovation was sort of the main focus that I was looking at, and how how we come to understand learning from failure. And then probably how you got to know me is that I was able to get I got my first position. I'm at Florida State University right now, and halfway through, I had this problem that I was trying to solve, and it was that we write a lot, right? Like everybody knows, or anybody that's doing research knows that you have to write a lot. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I wanted to get some help. So I walked into my department chair, and my department chair at the time said that they didn't have any funds to help out with, I wanted to get copy editing. So I thought, here I am teaching innovation, and I was teaching entrepreneurship at the time as well. I thought, well, hell, I could just build a platform to do that.
Yeah.
So it took a while to build out this platform, try to get a team together. In the town I'm in is Tallahassee, Florida. Mm-hmm. And that did not work. It was a giant flop. So I got a contract developer out of the Ukraine, which eventually I found it didn't work out, the relationship. So I found another group in India. Mm-hmm. And they've been pretty good. And then so I had this thing built out, and I put it on the internet, and I got crickets, like nothing. Nobody cared. There was absolutely nobody paid attention to it.
Was this the website?
Nobody paid attention to it. And silly me, I should have known that. Like I guess like everybody that does this kind of stuff sort of thinks that you've got like things would explode overnight, but it doesn't happen that way. So a friend of mine, I was kind of lamenting about this with a friend of mine that's kind of in the tech industry. And he was just like, well, why don't you just do some YouTube videos? So I started doing YouTube videos specifically about the platform, and nobody paid attention. Nobody cared.
Mhm.
And that's kind of a life lesson that I've learned. It's like nobody freaking cares. So, um, so I started doing this, but then I started talking about other things in my life, and what I realized eventually is that graduate students and other researchers and just other people were like gravitating towards like me just being open and talking about
Yes.
experiences of like
Yes.
how do you deal with like just life. And our life is weird, right? Like as
Yes.
researchers, we have a really weird life that other people just do not get. Like even my wife
So
doesn't
true.
get it,
Yeah.
um, which is really bizarre. And so I just, openly talking about these experiences, and that's how I think I came to know you
Yeah. Yep.
is is from doing this, and I got into all these other different social platforms and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like accidental the journey of doing this, and I would never think that I would be, what people would call it, social influencer now. I'm just a dude.
Who
I'm
knows?
just a
I think
guy.
you are because like your story is
Yeah,
interesting in some way because like there's two components to this, right? There's one part of it which is like what the video it's kind of related to the video that you posted yesterday, which was just do your thing and enjoy the
yeah,
process and like you don't have to target scientific productivity. You don't have to look for the result, but just go
yeah,
about doing your thing and somehow things fall into place. And
yeah,
I feel
yeah,
like the most impactful videos when I saw your channel for me was where you kind of where somebody really humanizes themselves out of that bubble of being I'm a professor or I'm this person,
yeah,
getting out of that box of professorship and that position
yeah.
to being so relatable. That was like really powerful.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, that's kind of who I am in the first place. But what's hard is that the profession forces you to like put on all of these airs. And honestly, I still view myself as like this 10-year-old boy,
Hmm.
and the rest of the world doesn't. But that's and you probably, I'm assuming a lot of people feel like that, right? Like they're kind of, I don't know. I did this to be interested in the world around me. I didn't do it for all of the pomp and circumstance.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's what
Um,
people eventually, that's like it is kind of evident, right? Like so there are some people who follow their heart and there's some people who
mhm,
want lines on their resume. And like especially when you told me that I didn't know that you did your bachelor's degree in chemical engineering. So that's news to me actually. So I thought you were just I didn't know your bachelor's background, but I did know that you are involved in management science because in that way it's again really relatable because I started with an aeronautics background and I didn't know like much about statistics and all of that, and when I moved into this, what I'm working on right now is mostly like computer vision and machine learning. So
mhm,
it's not too much of a
mhm,
transition like what you did, but still,
mhm.
people still found it weird that a guy who was working on fluid dynamics is now doing research on robots and computer vision. So it's very like in that sense, there's gonna be. I feel that a researcher, in a sense, is like an artist, and like
Yeah,
the best kind of art
absolutely.
comes out when you really let go, in a certain sense.
Yeah. No, that's. I mean, that's part of it. Is just like learning to just be in it. And it takes a lot of practice because when you get indoctrinated pretty quick of like you got to focus on all of this like productivity crap, and like it's really all about that. Like the culture is very much like it's industrial production applied to science, basically. um, and if you look at the history of industrial production in that sort of way, it often doesn't have the intended results that you'd like, particularly with creative endeavors, like you're saying.
Yeah, because like
Um,
that's more like a
yeah,
structured system for predictable inputs and outputs, right?
absolutely. That's exactly it. Yeah, that's it. And we don't, it's often you don't know what you're going to find.
Yeah.
And then we can't. I mean, and the trouble is then you've got to figure out like how do you you get null results, right? Like everybody gets those kind of things. So then you have to figure out what's the story behind that. And if you have this sort of fixed, um, approach that always works in this certain kind of way, and your hypothesis, and this is the I struggle with hypothesis testing, is we sort of have this deductive approach that the world sort of works this way, but the world does not work that way. And then you get this like null result, and then you have to figure out like how do I tell that story in a different direction. And if you're like fixed on telling a certain story, you can't tell any other story
Yeah.
that's there. You can't be creative.
I wonder, like in that sense, I don't know about the differences in different fields, especially like in my field, publishing negative results where your results aren't producing an improvement in the state of the art, or there's some proposed benefit or something like that. Uh, it, it it's very hard to publish those results. How is it in your field,
It's
Dr.
it's I mean that's universal across. And that's I mean partly it's because that there is a lot of bad scientists out there that doesn't do it rigorously, and doesn't sort of explore these things rigorously. And bad science is sort of a hard thing to put your finger on what is bad science, but I think to honestly, it's just like, did you struggle long enough on this problem? And can you show that you struggled long enough on this problem? And that there's lots of people that are kind of doing it superficially, and you have a superficial understanding, and then you're just like, well, I didn't get the intended result. You can't publish that.
Yeah.
Uh, if you just did it superficially, you got to actually um, take some time and thought and think about it.
That's a really nice way to put it, actually. Yeah, because it's easy to say that publish everything. That's like the other extreme of it, right? So it's not
Yeah,
good. Like I think the balance is when you can really justify, and the story actually comes out in a really coherent way, right? Um,
yeah.
yeah,
No, that's absolutely. There's a lot of storytelling that comes that is involved in the process. Um, and you're like the story is you figuring this out, of figuring out this whole process. And to me it's like it's a very personal journey in exploring these kind of things, because it's not like science that's discovering it, it's you that's discovering it and thinking about it.
right, right. So it's like
I don't know if that makes any
it it
sense, right?
is
Like
it,
it's not
it kind of
yeah.
does, but it kind of doesn't. Like, can you go a little bit deeper? Like, what exactly do you mean by that?
So the image that most people have is that science is like this very impersonal thing. That there is, this whole big institution of science, and the institution of science moves along at some clip. But when you start taking a deep dive into it, it's an extremely personal journey for every single scientist, and every single researcher that's out there. That is just, you know, really just exploring the things that they themselves are interested in based on the life experiences that they've had.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
That
So
kind of
you
makes that's the
do,
person like I think that's gonna be how the scientists' own quote unquote biases drive them for novel towards novel conclusions, I guess. Something like that.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Because we're all unique, right? We all come from different places. We're all going to find different things interesting, and so we have to arrive upon. Then that's the rub. That's the trick. Is that you find this interesting, and then you have to figure out like how do I convince people that don't care, that are literally like dead emotion to you, like they don't care, or maybe even like angry at you because of the things that you're working on. You have to convince them to figure out like how do I tell the story so that they actually really understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And the more people that you get to believe in this story, the more that it is convincing to a broader audience.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Yeah. I mean, like on a tangent then, like there's going to be a little bit of a stupid question. So it's like one of the things that I noticed over the years, like I've always been into reading in general, yes, like whether it's books or
Yeah.
usually news articles. So what I noticed when I got into graduate school and really started reading papers is I honestly like the childish or young teenager part of me always thinks that journalists are way better writers. They're like, if you go to a really good, like if you see a really good journalist or if you look at a news article or something, they're way better experience to read. So my kind of stupid question is that do you think it would ever be a good idea for scientific articles to be written in, say, a less dry way? Is that a possibility, or is that never going to happen?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think it kind of naturally happens. Sorry, an ant on my toe. Um, I I think it naturally happened. Like if you look at the ones that the people, and I don't really know your field so much, um, but if you look at the people that are making inroads, they're generally pretty good writers. They are able to craft a story at the get go, and whether it's writing, um, I'm assuming you guys do some code in the papers, but not nearly as much as what people would sort of think that you could do. So like you're good at telling the story, what this problem is, and then how you actually went about solving this particular problem.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the best scientific communicators, there is a bit of a correlation there with like, at least like it's at least a one-way kind of relationship where I've seen the most highly cited folks who are like, who've made fundamental contributions. They tend to have really, really deep, insightful kind of ways of articulating things. I guess the
Mm-hmm.
problem does come when it goes into the math of things because like it can get really rigorous in terms of the math. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
where I think that's where like students, I mean, people who are coming in from an undergrad to a graduate school background, I feel that they're going to have a little bit of a gap to transition in terms of the rigor, right? So like that's
Mm-hmm.
one thing that I felt. Maybe from your angle, like what are the kind of problems that you've seen that people transitioning into graduate school face when it comes to their research and writing?
Um, a great question. I think a key thing is really you get overwhelmed a lot. And dealing with the anxiety of the process of feeling like as soon as you go into it and it never ends, it never disappears, you feel completely inferior. You feel like, everybody else is so much better than you and so much more ahead. And that they are, that they're just a lot more better than you, whatever that is. And it's like managing that feeling of, I'm okay with who I am and where I'm at right now. And then I have to figure out how to just keep moving forward, regardless of all of that kind of stuff. And like it's really just sitting down and just doing the work at that point and getting into that. There's a term within creativity that it talks about the state of flow, where you just kind of feel like it's an outer body experience when you're actually working. And if you think about working, you really are in an outer body experience. You can't feel your arms. You can't, you don't understand the world around you. You're really just thinking about that one particular idea. And then you look back and you look up and you're like, oh, wait a minute. Like, what just happened there? I just wasted 2 hours of sitting there thinking about this thing. So I think that's ultimately of getting into that quicker and not worrying about all of the other stuff that goes on, and managing that part of it is like the key to getting into it. And then like, if you don't get to something, you don't get to it. Like it's not going to, it's the world's not going to end at that
Yeah.
point.
I guess like graduate school is about being okay with your ever expanding to-do list in some way.
Yes. Yeah, that is absolutely, that is so true.
Because
it is just like, yeah,
it's like
yeah.
everything expands. You get more tabs on your browser, then you get more tasks on your to-do list, and somehow, you just have to manage. Like, it doesn't like there's a feeling of burnout, that comes after a year or so. So
That's it. Like your first year, you're really excited generally. Well, the first few months, you're like really excited, and then it starts to like you start to see it, and then I'm assuming you're past comprehensives at this point, or
yeah, I'm past my qualifying exams, and I'm going to be taking my comprehensive. Okay. But like that makes me a PhD candidate, right? So I'm going to be doing that.
Okay. Yeah. So like you're getting real close to that point, and once that happens, like there's this kind of abyss. Like you'll go through a moment of, and it's longer than a moment. It's a few months where you're like, oh, I don't know what to do with myself. Everybody goes through it, and it's kind of funny to sort of see these patterns that you think when you're experiencing it is like you're the only one that's experiencing it, but it's pretty normal to go through all of this. And you're probably at a point right now where you're just like sick and tired of doing all of this reading and all of this work. And now it's like at this point where you're like at a decent clip. Now you can go out and do your own sort of thinking.
Yeah. Right now, it's for me, I'm at this point where I'm able to define a particular problem and then work through it and then hope, fingers crossed, I get good results. And it's about and being okay with that.
Everybody.
Yeah, it's like being okay with that negative result. And then you say all of this work that I did for a month, I don't have quite a bit to show for it, so I got to tell my advisor that. That's where I'm
I know that you're like, what did I just do? I spent all this work and I got nothing to show for it. Yeah. But at that point, I've been doing this long enough to know that it's often just the way that you're looking at it, and you have to just look at it a different way. Either like analytically, you're looking at it a different way, or from a different theoretical understanding, or go back, go into your code and see if there's a different way to sort of plot the data.
Yeah.
And often you do see, like there is the problem. The harder part is choosing the perspective that you actually want to use, and telling that particular story from that perspective of thinking about. This is like the trickier part, is thinking of how are other people going to perceive what I'm actually doing,
right?
And then thinking about how they're going to perceive it based on what I've actually wrote or done.
Right. Yeah, that's I think that's like targeting, like understanding the audience. It comes down to that, right?
Yeah. And it's so funny, right? Like the way that this all, it sounds like we're actually just a bunch of writers or whatnot, like writing novels.
Yeah, exactly. Writers and a bit of salespeople. There's a bit of sales.
Yeah.
There's a bit of sales.
Exactly. Yeah. There's actually a lot of sales involved in it. That's the whole politics part of it. Yeah. So, what are the pressing things that you have going on in your life that you'd like to talk about?
For me, I mean, mainly it's gonna be like, as I said, some of these questions that I've asked you, it's something that I've been, wondering about generally, but especially like at this point, how do I make myself prepared for this comprehensive exam? That's one. And the second thing is, one of my papers got outright rejected from a journal. So that was a rejection I had to deal with it took me a few days to process it, because I didn't feel as bad because I targeted a really ambitious venue, because that's my approach. I've been taking this approach where I take I submit my work to the most ambitious venue that I think is good and then go from there and see what they have. So I don't go in with
Mhm.
huge expectations of getting accepted. But then I'm thinking, I'm in my third year and I've submitted two papers and one of them got rejected and I have four to go. And one of the pressing things in my life right now is honestly, how do I make it from like just one under review to four under review? That's what's going on in my mind.
Yeah, yeah. That's honestly, that's where you got to just take a step back and like just go to that sort of Zen moment of focusing on just, hey, I'm just gonna do the work, and whatever happens, happens. There is a lot that goes on. You could do everything. That's one thing that I've learned. You could do absolutely everything perfectly and try to like be the best possible candidate and think that you're going to have everything all laid out. And, something could happen and nothing is going to go your way. And you just simply have to learn to be okay with that. Like, just that it will happen where you will think that you've done everything perfectly and you go through the process of going doing things perfectly, and then it doesn't work out for you, and so you just have to come back and say, hey, wait a minute, I gotta like think about who I am, think about like what the hell's going on here, like it's I'm not I'm if I worry about those external validations, then I'm going to get all caught up in that, and I'm going to start feeling bad about myself. And I know I'm actually a really talented, remarkable person. So I have to come back to who is it that I actually am, and really, pause on does this rejection matter? And often it doesn't. It really doesn't change who you are. It changes you to know that you can take a lot more challenges in the future. At least that's been my experience. I've gotten so many rejections that it's just unbelievable. After spending a lot of time on my work, so you have to take a step back and just know I'm a good person. I'm talented, which it sounds like you're unbelievably talented. I'm going to tell you this right now. It sounds like you're very sharp, and we would probably love to have you at the program that I'm at.
Wow,
But,
that's amazing. Yeah, that's I'm really flattered to hear that. Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Maslach. Yeah.
Well, you could just tell, right? Like you can tell when people care.
Yeah.
And I think that's the harder part for me is you have to go into it not caring as much. And you're probably a very conscientious, like you're always on the ball. Obviously if you're doing a podcast right now while going in graduate school, you're probably very motivated. So you got to be just like, screw it, right? Like I'm just going to do my work.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try to live as healthy as life as possible. And then whatever the outcomes that come from it. So detaching the fact that there's you, the person that's doing the work, and then there's the outcomes. It's like, and it was, I think I talked about in that video this week of, there's you, the operational person that's doing the thing, but then there's the stock market, right? Like companies do this.
Yes.
There's the who you are inside the company is not reflected in the stock market price at all. It's only mildly correlated with what's going on. In the long run, it's correlated, but it's such a long run that it doesn't matter. So in your day to day, you just have to be like, yeah, I'm pretty good. I'm a remarkable person. I've already made it a long ways, and the rejection doesn't matter. And I'm gonna get up and do it again tomorrow.
Yeah. I guess like you must have like over the years, like you must have submitted in so many places. It's just a long cycle time, It's that you're thinking about sustained effort over a period of months. and the feedback cycle is a little bit longer than, let's say, some other profession, right, where you get immediate feedback and you can take corrective action. So I guess the equation, there's a bit of a qualitative difference here. I think, like, I also think like this might be a little bit of a thing that I've been like, I don't know if you agree with this, but it's like today we have, big internet, open internet. Science has not quite, caught up to it really, because right now, I'm not sure if you've heard of arXiv. So this is like a preprint server where, papers are usually published there as a preprint, quote unquote. It's like before it's been published officially in a journal. So what do you think about the prospect of, doing away with this concept of journals entirely and only having conferences and preprints? Because this would reduce that problem, right? Like, you'd have open review and...
So technically it would, right? But it's not going to solve the social problem of what we're actually trying to show, what we're trying to do, right? It's like the journals know that they have unlimited space already. They can publish as much as they can. It's the gatekeeping problem. It's the social dynamics behind what you're actually trying to do. So imagine, instead of a technical problem of it's just a technology. Imagine it as you've got a group of very smart people that all kind of know each other, and those smart people are all vying for the attention of all the other smart people. And so what you're trying to do is actually do more of a game of status and legitimacy and proving to other people that you're actually, a player within the particular community. So it's not a technical problem. And I don't think that's ever going to disappear. We're going to have all sorts of interesting things, like the number of, I've already put up, thousands of YouTube videos, but it gives me no credibility scientifically, because nobody is looking towards that as like, is this person actually a credible player? What matters is, did I get an article in Science? Did I get an article in Nature? And did I get several of those ones? And then on top of it, layering on top is not just, and this is where people get really confused. Administratively, they like to count articles, but it's not just counting the articles. It is, are the people that you would like to have a conversation with, like you want to sit down and have a tea, right? Like you can imagine anybody in the world, and you want to sit down and have tea with Elton John. Well, if you're writing specifically to Elton John and Elton John does not care about you, then like you could write forever. But if you wrote something that resonated with Elton John and Elton John said, that's a really cool idea, that is the thing that you're actually trying to do, is get people to turn their heads. Like in your field, if Turing was around still and you wrote some amazing new software that proved that the Turing test actually held, he'd be like, oh, I'm paying attention to that. Yeah. And that's the more important thing. It's not the technical problem. We can write as many blog posts, you can put up as many podcasts as you want. Nobody is going to care about it. They really truly are not. And so it's like, just, you have to tell your story, however that might be. And that's nice. I mean, it's really nice to do that, but the academic community does not care. And so it's you actually convincing them that your idea is sharp enough that they should pay attention to it.
Yes. So that's where I think even then, this is where the technology can still help, right? Like, so it's not just a blog post. So let's say you have arXiv. arXiv is, again, it's like a preprint server with a lot of papers, which is kind of similar to a blog post. However, you're kind of doing away with the peer review format as it stands today. And instead you have a democratized peer review process with it's not anonymized, but it's rather democratized with like more than just 3 reviewers or 5 reviewers, but rather there's going to be a forum of reviewers where the reviews and comments and improvements to papers are happening dynamically. So wouldn't that like reduce the lead time between review and, let's say, the acceptance of the paper finally? Because that's why I think there's a lot of frustration, right?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, all of that is true. Like technically, it's going to reduce times, but you're not the whole. What I'm talking about is like take a step back and think about the community, the social structure, the individuals. They will just adapt, and it will be just a new game that's played within that particular arena. So you can, an analogy that is really close is Wikipedia. Wikipedia, anybody could write stuff on there, but there is still a social structure behind Wikipedia where there is the strongest Wikipedians. I forget what they're called, but they're like the hierarchy. Like they're the ones that actually control things. So even if you do write stuff on there, most of the time nobody cares. But every once in a while, if you write something that's clever and interesting, the chief Wikipedians are actually going to be paying attention to it. And that's what you're trying to actually do is play, recognize that it's a group of people trying to figure out the world, rather than it is technology that is the limiting factor.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, like the role of technology must be to kind of align the desired social value or the desired social outcome from this process, whatever we're doing. The system needs to facilitate that. Like we need to define what our social goals are, which is to disseminate a body of knowledge and then continually improve upon it. And we need to have an infrastructure that enables this without, the infrastructure itself causing dampening effects on this happening, right? I mean, there might be issues within the social structure itself, but the infrastructure should not add to it.
Yeah, so I would argue that your view of science is probably different than mine. So your view of science is that we're just building knowledge and, thinking about just adding better ideas that's out there. My view is different. My view is that there's a bunch of politically motivated actors that are part of the system, and these politically motivated actors are gatekeepers, just like as if you were in law, for example. There's better law firms that control most of the opportunities that happen within the legal community. Right. So it's the same thing that happens within our community. Is actually a political system, or a system that relies on legitimacy, on status, on sort of hidden things that are not obvious. So it's not about specifically collecting more ideas, but it's about the institution. It's about the broader scientific mechanism of how it actually works. And it's obviously is going to adapt to when the technology adapts, but it's still going to be the same. We're still, I mean, if you look at, broadly speaking, you look at Arizona State University, it's been around for 100 some years. Mm-hmm. Harvard's been around for 200 and some years. They've gone through a lot of different technology changes, but we still see the same structure and hierarchy between, ASU and Harvard. So people are very smart and they will adapt to the new technology.
Right. I mean, I think I get it from, I think I kind of understand where you're coming from way better now, because I can think of another analogy, like why do people still use the p-value, right? Like why is there no, if there was a better method, why is the p-value used? Because even though there's something called p-hacking, right? despite that,
Mm-hmm.
the supremacy of the p-value has not quite been questioned in the institutional level. So that let's say you have a new idea and you do not use the p-value, even though your idea might be good, that your research could be rejected because it didn't use that standard technique. Is it something like that?
Yeah, so that's kind of it, right? But it's a group of people trying to figure this stuff out, like real human beings trying to figure this stuff out, doing real human being things, and we just so happen to be talking about science.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so it's a different perspective. It's not like it's removing yourself and looking at, wait a minute, there is actually a real structure behind why this actually happened. Like, why did I get into Arizona State University compared to another institution? Why am I actually here? Is because that there is the underlying structure and how it sort of sorts itself out.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. That's such an important point. Given my background, where I came from, one of the factors that helped me decide Phoenix was not right now, but three years ago. It was the fact that it was not as expensive as another city.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
Mm-hmm.
that. Those things do play. I mean, yeah, those are like really, yeah, human factors and societal factors that drive decision making. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's all of it. That's everything with it. Is and I'm not being like sort of superfluous here. I sort of understand. I'm actually building the platform that I think I hope people will use to sort of say what you're doing. But I also realize like nobody gives a damn. I think like you have to come down to look at the actual numbers and how this stuff works. Like there is the world, and you can sort of think about how this works from a technical approach. But if nobody gives a damn, then you have to come back to it and think about, okay, what is really going on here? This is a broader thing that is not a technical solution. It's actually more of how do we organize groups of people so that they can sort of show that they have legitimacy and status in certain ways. But obviously the legitimacy and status is based on valid insight often.
Yes.
That these aren't people that are just making up stories. Some people do, but I don't think that there is something that's behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that legitimacy and status is earned. But at the same time, it's still ultimately an important part of the process. It's an important part of what happens in universities and within research institutions.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the hierarchies are kind of inevitable, right? Like, so this, I can kind of relate this to what one of these things that this psychologist, I think Dr. Jordan Peterson, he used to say, hierarchy of competence. He
Mm-hmm.
expects that in some approximate sense, over scale and over time, like a system that starts from a hierarchy of competence can degrade into other modes of hierarchies, So even if you start with that, human factors come in and they influence the hierarchy to change from something that was based on competence and insight into something else.
Yeah, but it's so this is where I take a different approach from. So I understand, like being an engineer too, right? Like I understand it. The root is actually the humans, and it's not like the human factors after the fact is a moderating effect or a conditional effect after. It is the humans that are figuring this stuff out, and they are creating that system. And so if you can't convince people, if you're not seductive enough, so to convince people that you're part of this community, then you're never going to really sort of convince them that. And so it takes this whole process of how do I navigate it, and how do I realize that there is a social structure, there is it's the cafeteria in your high school, and you have to figure out, well, how do I navigate the cafeteria in my high school, and deal with that. And so eventually I will be at the top head table in the cafeteria of the high school.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of an interesting way to think about it, because the reason is like this: before that we have this technical competency, and then, like, as you said, to really advance, you need to understand that fundamental human interaction, which is the basis of the entire system as
Mm-hmm.
a whole, right? So how about people
Mm-hmm.
who's like, when you come to the US, for example, I've been fortunate, like, at least it's been very easy for me to adapt into the US, because I've learned I've done my undergraduate degree and all of my school education in English. So there's a lot of, like, my lab has a lot of Chinese students. If those
Mm-hmm.
students are listening, and there's a new Chinese student from China who's learned a lot in Chinese, and his first language is not English, they're obviously, they go through a lot of struggle even when it comes to delivering
Mm-hmm.
presentations. What would your advice be to them to succeed in graduate school if your first language is not English?
So probably the same thing that I would give. I'm going to scoot off in like 5 minutes.
Okay.
But I would probably say the exact same thing. I'd never had that experience because I'm an English speaking, I only know one language. Despite being Canadian, I am, not bilingual in French and English. But I would say the exact same thing. Just live your life. Try to realize that if you have any sort of weird feelings from people and they rub you the wrong way or they treat you inferior, as if, that's going to happen. Just know the problem is on them. As long as you're walking into it as, I'm a good person, I'm going to try, I'm going to really just be a human and relate to other people and know that I'm struggling through this process. I think that's the only thing you can hope for. And if it's not language, if it's not, the color of your skin, if it's not the country you grew up in, if it's not your nose, if it's your voice. I get people that call me all the time. I get telemarketers all the time and say, ma'am, if it's not like something that is different, that's unique, there's going to be another thing that's there that you're going to have these same feelings for. And you just got to be like, whatever, like that's a crappy thing that person just did to me, but whatever, I'm going to live my life. I'm going to be confident. I'm going to be a decent person. And I'm going to try to treat other people nicely despite somebody being a jerk to me in that circumstance. So that's it. That's the name of the game, is reminding yourself that you don't have to play those games and you could be a nice person.
Makes it really simple. I think I just want to wrap it up there on that note. I'd like to thank you, Dr. Maslach, for coming onto my podcast. I really loved having you. It was an amazing conversation. And
it's a joy. And keep it up. I know that these things, I wish I would have done this my whole time. I know that I know it takes a lot of work, but I wish I would have had those experiences from many years ago. You'll look back fondly on it. Like sometimes I'll listen to the stuff that I said from 3 years ago, and I'll hear my kids in the background when they were little, and I was like, oh gosh, I wish I would have even done more. So
that's so beautiful.
Just keep it up. And you're doing a world of good for everybody else, because nobody else is going to stick their neck out for anybody. It's you and 10,000 other people that are going to listen to this. So keep it up.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maslach. I hope you have a good day. Thank you for coming.
You too. It was a pleasure. And enjoy the holiday this weekend.
Yep.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.